trends and lessons from SAP customers, and SAP's integration to Microsoft Teams. Those are just two of the topics we're going to cover here in episode number 13 of the Journey to S4HANA podcast.
Welcome to Journey to S4HANA, the podcast that covers everything related to SAP implementations. This podcast is not affiliated with SAP and covers the realistic truth behind S4HANA, Ariba, and SuccessFactors ERP implementation success. Whether you're new to the world of SAP, an existing ECC, or R3 customer, a multinational team, or a mid-sized organization, this podcast is for you. Now, here's your host, Eric Kimberling.
Hello, welcome to episode number 13 of the Journey to S4HANA podcast. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting. We're an independent consulting firm that helps clients through their S4HANA and their non-SAP digital transformation journeys. Third Stage Consulting is also the sponsor of this podcast, and I'm your host here today with Darian Fiakuski. Darian, thanks for being here today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Got a great show for you planned today. And before we jump in, just a few housekeeping items. First of all, this is the podcast that covers everything related to S4HANA implementations, the good, the bad, the ugly, and the independent tech agnostic view of the world. So we are not affiliated with SAP. So we're here just to provide the real truth behind what it takes to succeed in your S4HANA implementations. You can find new episodes of the show and all the past episodes of the show by going to the website journeytos4hana.com. So be sure to check that out. We've got this episode plus two more left in season 1 of this podcast series. So thank you for being here today. Today, we've got a couple of great topics to cover. First, we're going to get into SAP's integration to Microsoft Teams and how that's unfolding and evolving from a product development perspective. And then later in the show, stick around because we'll have a consultant named Jocelyn Hayes on the show. She's a SAP consultant that's been in the space about as long as I have. I think we started right around the same time. And she's going to share some of her lessons from having done a number of different SAP implementations over the years. So trends and lessons from some of her SAP customers and her experience. So we'll have her on the show to chat about that. So before we get to Jocelyn and our other topics here today, though, Darian, you have some social media questions that we've received on social media recently. What have you got in store for us?
Yeah, some good ones today. So the first one is we have a stable SAP ECC solution that has been heavily enhanced over the past 25 years to fit our business. First, SAP said we need to get over to S4HANA before 2030, but now they say we need to run to S4HANA in the cloud. The cost of moving to S4HANA is quite huge, but the cost of running the same software in the cloud is tripling the cost when you have a 10-year planning horizon. They indirectly say that we are idiots if we want to run S4 on-prem, but we are basically geniuses if we run the same software in the cloud for a little more cost and reduced possibilities. Is this something that you're seeing often, and what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I love this question and comment because it's striking at the heart of what I consider a big problem in the SAP space right now. One is this artificial deadline that's been created by SAP to not only move off legacy systems like ECC by 2027, but also to not just move off onto S4HANA, but do it in a public cloud environment. So SAP is pushing really hard to get as many customers as they can over to the public cloud. And, you know, what's interesting is they announced this 2027 deadline and they got a lot of customers to move to S4HANA. But what happened is a lot of them moved to S4HANA on-prem. And I think what SAP is doing now is saying, okay, that's great, but we can't sustain two products, one on-prem product and then a cloud product too. And actually you could argue there's really three products. I mean, in some ways, because I guess it's really just two, but you've got on-prem, you've got private cloud, and then you've got public cloud. Public cloud's a different system than on-prem. And so, you know, I think that artificial deadline is one problem. The other problem that's alluded to here is the arrogance of SAP. And I've talked about this in past episodes. In fact, last week, I think I used that exact word. I think SAP as a company and just the SAP community at times has a arrogance to it. And I don't say that to be offensive or to piss anyone off. I say it because I think a lot of times big companies like SAP think they have all the answers, and they think that a customer is quote unquote an idiot if they don't do what is in their best interest, in SAP's best interest. And you further exasperate that by throwing in the fact that an SAP sales rep is more likely to make a lot more money on a cloud subscription sale than they are an on-prem sale. So you've got economic incentives at play here. You've got a lot of moving parts that are influencing or pressuring customers. In my opinion, it's not appropriate. It's not ethical. I think there's a lot of issues that are caused by all this, but unfortunately, it's the reality of the landscape we're dealing with right now. So you've just got to hold steady. I mean, you just got to do what's right for your business and not succumb to the pressure to replace your system. Just because someone has a gun to your head saying you need to switch your system now doesn't mean you should. You've got to do what's right for your business. So that's probably the best advice I can give. But you didn't really ask for my advice. Your question was, is this something I'm seeing or is it common? And unfortunately, it is pretty common. So the good news, bad news is this person is not alone. We see it a lot in the SAP ecosystem.
Yeah, it's definitely something that you don't want to hear businesses doing because it's not really the best look, in my opinion, but definitely something that hopefully gets addressed in the next few years here with SAP. Moving kind of into our newsworthy topic of the day, this one is specifically about SAP and Microsoft Teams really integrating together and how you can use that in your business. So SAP released a webinar titled Integrate SAP Processes with Microsoft Teams. And this focuses on the integration of business processes from SAP S4HANA into Microsoft Teams using a connection called Looply. This is just an integration platform, basically. This integration can significantly enhance processes and accessibility and efficiency within organizations, especially if they're obviously using Microsoft Teams and S4HANA specifically. Eric, how large of a role do integrations such as this play in increasing user adoption throughout an organization?
I think it helps tremendously because people are used to their Microsoft products. They're used to Outlook and Teams and some of the other products they're using. So the more you can integrate with Teams and with Microsoft Office and some of the productivity tools that everyone's used to, I think the better off you are. I think it also provides a good, maybe even more importantly, it's a good, what's it called? A good positioning against Microsoft Dynamics, because one of the strengths of Microsoft Dynamics is how much it has that Microsoft look and feel and how well integrated it is to Office 365 and SharePoint and some of the other Microsoft tools, Power BI and Power Platform and everything. So I think by SAP integrating to Microsoft tools, you're sort of blunting the strategic advantage that some may say D365 has in the marketplace, and you're creating that same advantage for SAP. But to your point, the user adoption becomes a lot easier anytime you can tie it to a product that people are already comfortable using.
Yeah, that makes sense. And any companies that are maybe wanting to integrate these systems, specifically these two systems together, what change management concepts would you want to pass along to any of them that they should integrate, I guess, before you selecting these two platforms?
Yeah, well, I'd say first you want to make sure that you don't use that integration to Teams as a excuse or a cop-out not to use SAP. So I'm not familiar with how exactly they're integrating to Teams and whatnot, but a lot of times when we've seen integration to other tools, people sort of use that as a way to bypass the system and just use what they're comfortable with and not use S4HANA, the core S4HANA product, the way that it could be used. So, from that perspective, on one hand, yes, it makes user adoption easier if there's integration, but it also can create a slippery slope where people, resist using the system the way it was meant to be used, or they just use Teams and collaboration tools, Microsoft-based collaboration tools that don't capture data that should be captured in SAP or whatever. So, those are some of the things you just need to make sure is that you're getting the real value and getting out of the S4HANA investment what it is you expect to get out of it. And that's where the change management piece of it can help.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm really excited, though, to get into this conversation today with Jocelyn.
Yeah, Jocelyn's someone I've known for a long time. She's been in the SAP space for about the same amount of time as me. I think I've known her now for about 15, maybe 20 years. It's been a long time. We crossed paths a long time ago. We're both here in the Denver area, which is where you and I are based, Arian, and she's based here in the Denver area where Third Stage is based. And she's going to be on the show talking about just her general experience having helped so many different SAP customers through their S4HANA implementations over the years. So we're going to have her on the show here in just a moment. But first, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be back with more of the Journey at S4HANA podcast. If you're using SAP, Oracle, or Microsoft Dynamics, or any other sort of legacy system, you might be feeling pressure to migrate to a more modern version of those legacy systems. However, there's another option out there. You can look at third-party support as a way to extend your life cycle and save money on your legacy systems while you figure out your own IT roadmap that fits your schedule. So there's a company out there called Spinnaker Support that supports, among others, SAP, Oracle, and Microsoft customers. And in general, Spinnaker customers are going to save 60% on their annual support maintenance. They're going to get extended lifecycle support. So these are support levels that help organizations take control of their IT roadmap and give them an option that extends beyond the sunset period for what SAP, Microsoft, Oracle, and other software vendors are offering. So that's one of the things that's the beauty, is not only you're saving money, but it also gives you an opportunity to work past and have a roadmap that works past the timeline that the software vendors have given. In addition, you're going to deal with or leverage expertise from consultants and support professionals that have over 20 years of experience on average. You're going to get world-class security. You're going to get proactive support. So it's actually not just fixing stuff that breaks, but also ensuring that you get more value out of your system. And Spinnaker also provides global availability. So it's really important that you check out this as an option. There's third-party support providers like Spinnaker that can give you an option that takes some of that pressure off to have to feel like you have to upgrade your system right now. So to check out this concept and to learn more, I encourage you to read a white paper that we've provided for you to the listeners of this show. It's called The Skeptic's Guide to Third-Party Maintenance and Support. So there's a link in the description field of this podcast, so be sure to check that out. You can download that. You can learn more about what third-party support is, learn more about the advantages and what some of the common frequently asked questions are, and really just address any questions you might have. So be sure to check it out. It's from Spinnaker Support. You can download that paper for free, and hope you enjoy the rest of this episode. Hello, welcome back to episode number 13 of the Journey to S4HANA podcast. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm your host for today. I'm here with Darian Fiakuski as my co-host, and we're both with Third Stage Consulting, an independent consulting firm that helps clients with their S4HANA implementations as well as their non-SAP digital transformation journeys as well. You can find new episodes of the show every week by going to journeyto s4hana.com. I'm excited for our next guest, Jocelyn Hayes, who is a SAP consultant who's been in the space for over 2 decades now. She's got a lot of great experience with customers and helping them through their S4HANA implementations. And we're going to talk about some of the lessons learned from her experience and some of the tips she has for organizations that are about to go through an S4HANA implementation. So with that all being said, Jocelyn, thanks for being here today.
Thank you, Eric. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, glad to have you here, and excited to chat with you, an expert in the SAP community. You've been in this space for a long time, and excited to learn from you here today. But before we jump into some of the questions I've got for you, tell us a little bit about yourself and your background and what you do today, but also what you've done in the past.
So I always like to start from the beginning,
Right.
but make it quick. So it's nearing 30 years, which is crazy. I started it as an engineer at IBM, and on my first day at that first job, they put me in SAP training. So my very first project out of college was to work on an SAP implementation. From there, I went to one of the big four, did SAP implementations for a number of years there. Then I kind of went into the independent route, worked for a company where we focused on project team training and user readiness, and then worked for a small boutique advisory company where I really got to learn a little bit more about things outside of SAP, really around operating model, how technology impacts organizations versus being on the other side of it. Really, we're looking more on the business side of technology through the business transformation side. And then about 4 years ago, I left that firm and started my own. And now we offer trusted advisory services around SAP projects. To help companies get ready for their SAP implementations, to help them during their SAP implementations, and then make sure after they do go live that they actually get the value out of those implementations that they set out to get.
Great. Yeah, I imagine there's a lot of business and a lot of opportunity for you in that space right now. With
Absolutely. Yeah.
All the companies moving to S4HANA now.
Yep.
And speaking of companies moving to S4HANA, what types of clients or what types of customers in general are you seeing move to the S4HANA platform?
So primarily in my experience, what I'm seeing, it's mostly companies that have been on SAP. And that could just be from the exposure that I get. I'm very involved in the local SAP user group. And then, everybody that I've worked with over the past 30 years are SAP customers. So that's what I'm exposed to. So I would say primarily SAP customers, but I recently went to that user group meeting and met a client that is just getting ready to start their SAP S/4HANA journey, and they're a brand new SAP customer. So it's all over the map. It's still large enterprises, sometimes medium enterprises, but it definitely is more around the large enterprises. And it's across all the industries that SAP is always focused on: manufacturing, distribution, retail, all over.
Yeah, yeah. And now when you see these different companies moving to S/4HANA, especially these ones that you're saying have been on a legacy SAP product like ECC or R3, what are some of the biggest differences or changes that they can expect in an S/4HANA environment versus what they might be used to with ECC or R3?
Yeah. So just to kind of go back into my expertise. So my expertise was I was a functional consultant for many years, but then I've kind of moved on to that business side. So when I look at applications like SAP, I really look at them from what are the value streams, what are the processes they run, and what are the differences between what it used to do and what it does do. And from my perspective, from really the core of the ERP, it hasn't changed that much. We still have, we don't call it, the same value streams anymore. The old school people will still call it procure to pay or materials management. But those basic core functions, it's still 80% of what you're getting out of SAP. Now they've acquired a lot of companies over the years and developed a larger landscape of what they can provide. And some of those just work with S/4HANA. So you don't have a choice to use some of those newer technologies with your older ECC or ERP. But from my perspective, from a business perspective, there's not a whole lot from the core that has changed. Now, that said, if you don't go to S4 and go to these newer technologies, you're going to limit yourself to not be able to use some of the more advanced technologies like AI and a lot of the data analytics and just having faster processing speeds and able to have data a little more real time, those kinds of things.
Gotcha. And you mentioned some of the other platforms that SAP has acquired, for example, Ariba on the procurement side and SuccessFactors within HR, Concur, Hybris on the CRM side. So you've got these different solutions that SAP has acquired over the years. How are those platforms being deployed with S/4HANA? Or maybe put it another way, how do those platforms affect S/4HANA implementations in your experience?
Well, if it's being done at the same time, it certainly increases your risk and your complexity of your project, and obviously the cost.
Right.
So, I would always encourage clients to try to limit their scope as much as possible without having to do a lot of rework down the road, and really be selective in what technologies they go with in their phase one round, so that they're not biting off more than they can chew. I think a lot of companies that try to do it all at once end up failing and having to restart and replan, and it ends up costing them a lot more money than just trying, than their original approach of trying to do it all at once.
Yeah. The other question I have a lot of times when we see clients that are thinking about implementing S/4HANA along with one or more of these other bolt-on systems, for lack of a better word, even though they're all SAP, there are separate systems. But one thing I have to wonder too is, like, do you really need them? Like, do you need SuccessFactors? Do you need Ariba? Or could you get by with the core functionality of S/4HANA? I think that's another question you often have to ask yourself, because I think if you're a sales rep, you might.
Yeah. Do you need Ariba as your purchasing processes and your those kinds of processes that complex that you need that additional tool? Or can you use the HCM in SAP or the HR modules in SAP and not necessarily have to have SuccessFactors? Absolutely. And I would also encourage customers, being on the focus on the business readiness side, is looking into some of the tools that will actually help support your operations as you go live. Recently, SAP purchased Signavio, which is a great tool to build out your business architecture, to really be able to lay out your business processes in an online format and be able to use that as part of your training materials, but also just educating your user base on how the processes are changing, and give them some of that while you're going through the implementation, and giving them some of that early look using that tool, because it has a collaboration hub that allows all of the users in the company to go look at what those future processes are by role. And then the other one that I think is very beneficial when you're going forward with an SAP implementation is Enable Now. So that's the in-application support tool that helps with not just your training materials, but also your in-application help. So when you get stuck on how to do something, you have it easily at your fingertips to get a tour of how to do a transaction, or to access some of those process documents, or to even go back to one of your courses that would teach you how to do the functions that you're getting stuck on.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a good reminder that there's some tools that'll enable the implementation, maybe make it a little bit easier, but then there's other ones that might actually complicate it or make it more risky, that you might want to either just validate that you really need those additional solutions and or push it off to phase 2, phase 3, or whatever later on.
And, of course, there's a price tag associated with those. There's the cost of the implementation, the cost of the licensing. Now, with the Rise and the Grow model, they do include starter kits for those, so you can try them out before you have to buy licenses for everybody. So there's enough for the project team to get going, and then you can decide later if you want to expand and get more user licenses. But that is one nice thing about that the Grow and Rise contracts is they give you a taste of a lot.
Yeah. And I want to come back to that.
And Signavio and Enable Now are those. Yeah.
Yeah. I'll come back and ask you some more about Grow and Rise now that you brought it up. I've got to follow up on that. But before I come back to that, I wanted to ask you too around just implementations in general. What are some of the biggest challenges that you see customers face, particularly if these challenges might be different than what they faced when they were first implementing ECC or R3 or maybe some non-SAP legacy product in the past? What are those biggest challenges you're seeing nowadays?
Well, sadly, it's the same thing you and I talked about 20 years ago when we met,
right?
Or 15 years ago, or whatever it was. We're seeing the same implementation mistakes, the same reasons for failure, the same reasons for the challenges as we did back then. And it really boils down to, is it a business-led project, not IT-led? And a lot of times, you'll go to a client and they'll feel like it's business-led because, the CEO or the COO or the VP of sales is standing up and saying, we're going to do this, and they're supportive of it. But it still is run on a day-to-day basis by the IT team and the CIO. And that's got to change if these projects are going to be successful. So I would say truly make it business-led, make your not just your executive sponsor, but even your program manager, someone from the business, and have them fully involved in it. And it starts at the leadership level, but it goes down all the way down, within the organization to the user level. And, I often tell clients, we always used to talk about that 3 in the box, where you have a consultant, somebody from IT for that module, and then somebody from the business. But often that third role, that business role, either they're fully on the project and not going back and talking to the business, and they're kind of expected to cover not just their division, but all of the divisions. So maybe the project's being implemented by 10 divisions and they represent one, so they're only giving the voice of one. And they're never encouraged to go back and talk to the other 9 and build a community with those other 9. So something I always want to do when I start on these projects is I'll take that one business person in the box and say, let's identify all the people you need to be communicating with as your change agent, your informal change agents and business representation. And let's come up with a plan for how often you're going to check in with them. And I really encourage them to spend as much as 25 to 50% of their time going back and talking to the business about what they've done. Even if they feel like it's not quite ready. Everybody wants to wait until they have something that they can ta-da and show, and all their master data is in there, all their process, it's almost fully tested. But there's so much you can do further up this upstream to start those conversations and to get people really understanding what's going to be changing and how roles might change and how they're going to get the value of it. Because at the end of the day, that's the most important thing is when you go live, who's measuring that you're actually going to get your ROI on this? And it's not just a lift and shift of your technology.
All right, good stuff. Well, hold that thought, Jocelyn. I've got a lot more questions for you. But first, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back with more of the Journey to S4HANA podcast. If you're going through an S4HANA implementation, you're looking for best practices and tips on how to make your project more successful, I encourage you to check out 2 resources that I made available to our listeners here on this podcast. First is our guide to a successful S4HANA implementation. It's a paper that I wrote based on all of our clients that have implemented S4HANA, some of the lessons we've learned, some of the best practices that we typically advise our clients to follow when going through their S4HANA implementation. So be sure to check that out. You can find that in the links below in this podcast. You can also scan the QR code right in front of you. The second thing you might want to check out is an online course that I've created. It's a course that's called the Deep Dive into SAP S4HANA Implementations. And in that 2.5-hour course, I get into all the basics of what SAP S4HANA is, what it takes to make the project more successful, how to manage change, how to handle the project planning, how to manage your system integrator, as well as some case studies from some of our clients and some of the lessons learned from some of our clients. So check out that training as well. So there's two things you could check out here, both in the links below. One is the guide to S4HANA implementations. The other is my S4HANA training course. So be sure to check it out. And our goal here is to help you be more successful in your transformation. So I hope you found this information useful, and we'll continue on with the show.
Are you looking for ways to promote your product or service to enterprise technology decision makers and influencers throughout the world, like the ones who listen to this podcast? Major Tom Productions creates media, events, and influencer marketing for B2B technology providers. Our productions are exciting, educational, disruptive, and effective. Most importantly, they create results. Our content is unlike any other in this industry, engaging, influential, and trusted by technology buyers and influencers throughout the world. Each month, our productions reach hundreds of thousands of targeted buyers and decision makers who trust and engage with our honest and tech-agnostic content. With long-tail viral results and engagement with our content, Major Tom Productions provides a way to reach your target market and create awareness, calls to action, and a connection with potential customers. So collaborate with us today. Learn how we can feature your product or service on podcasts such as Transformation Ground Control, Journey to S4HANA, and Journey to Dynamics 365. We can also feature your brand on our YouTube channel called Digital Transformation with Eric Kimberling, which boasts over 100,000 subscribers and over 2 million video views per year. You can also participate in our in-person events, including our Digital Stratosphere Conference. Contact us today to learn more. We can tailor a marketing campaign that works for you. We look forward to helping more people learn more about and become engaged with your brand.
Hello, welcome back to episode number 13 of the Journey to S4HANA podcast. My name is Eric Kimberling here with Darren Fiakuski. You can find new episodes of this show every week by going to journeyto s4hana.com. The show is sponsored by Third Stage Consulting and produced by Major Tom Productions. So thank you for being here today. We're here having a conversation with Jocelyn Hayes, and we're talking about some of her experiences with her S4HANA implementations and some of her client work over the years. You know, let's face it and call a spade a spade. A lot of customers are going to S4HANA right now because they have to, because they don't want to deal with the end of life, lack of support for ECC and R3. So a lot of customers are not thinking necessarily strategically. They're thinking more reactively to, SAP is cutting off support, so therefore I need to move to S4HANA, preferably cloud, by the way, ASAP, basically. So what, how do you convince customers to not think so reactively and think more strategically about what they want out of S4HANA so they're getting the full value that you allude to there?
Well, it always depends on the customer and to know your audience, right? And who you're speaking to at the customer. But sometimes I'll use the scare tactics of telling them about historical projects that I've either been a part of or have familiarity with, and give them some real live examples of how these things have failed by not having their involvement. I'll also try to play the what if scenarios, like, what if you are expecting this particular change or new way of working that is going to get you X return and it doesn't happen? What are you going to do then? How are you going to go back and fix it and try to put yourself in that future state? We always say, like, what would you tell your 7-year-old self?
Right.
Try to put yourself in that situation. Try to come up with some of those analogies to get them to to make it a little more personal to them and not just, a story that they hear about another company that failed.
Right. Yeah, exactly. You also alluded to adoption and getting people to use the system and getting the value out of the system. What are some of the tips or best practices you've seen work best to get your employees comfortable with S/4HANA and
Yeah.
familiar with the new workflows and all that stuff?
Well, so I think it first starts with working with those business representatives and those communities that those business representatives have built out to identify where are the biggest changes and the biggest impacts to the organization of what we've been showing you. And then you take those and you say, okay, if we don't do that change, what is the cost of it? And you challenge them to actually put some dollars or some hours or some measure around the cost of not doing it. Then you come back and you're like, well, how can we measure that they actually do it? Let's pretend we've gone live and we want to go back and measure, did they do that? How can we tactically measure that? Because I think a lot of companies don't think about that. They don't think about, well, I could actually be running reports in the system that are going to give me some information about whether they're doing something properly or not. Are they having to kick an invoice back 5 times for whatever errors or because somebody didn't do something downstream in a data governance organization? But how are we actually going to measure this stuff when we go live and do that in advance and don't wait until afterwards because it's really hard to chase it after.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I think identifying the changes to people and their jobs and how it's going to affect their workflows, I think that's a great way to start because that's really sort of that grassroots. That's where the grassroots adoption is going to happen in their world, not just the big picture of how SAP is being deployed, but more specifically, how is it being deployed for that individual or that work group and how's it going to affect their jobs?
Right. Well, and then of course, working with the mid-level management to ensure that they understand the cost of not doing those changes and put some ownership on them and put it as part of their KPIs for their performance metrics. So it's really important to actually try to measure what matters in these projects, but figure out in advance what you want to measure so that when you do go live, you're measuring it. And that you've also talked in advance to the communities about here's what we're going to measure to make sure we're successful so that they know that those are the important things they've got to do to change, to reap the benefits of the system.
Yeah, exactly.
It's easy to say, but it's so hard to do.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned a few minutes ago about how when you and I met 15 years ago, or when you and I started in this industry close to 30 years ago, I think we both started around the same time. It's amazing to see how many of these same mistakes keep getting repeated year after year, decade after decade. So it's always fun to unpack and talk about, what should be happening that's a little bit different than the way companies have implemented technology in the past.
And I'd like to touch on another part of of where failure comes from, or challenges. So, we know that every SAP customer, when they're doing an SAP implementation, typically go with a system integrator, with an SI. And it can be, tier 1, tier 2 SI, it doesn't matter. Their job is for solution readiness. And then, what I'm talking about is business readiness. Their job is not to get your business ready. They'll say they are, but ideally, really, if you look at their contracts, at the end of the day, they're responsible for getting your solution ready. And they'll say that we're going to make it meet your business requirements, and it's going to, we're going to use as much of the standard operating practices in the system, the best practices. We're not going to customize things as much as they, but it really comes down to they're there to get the solution ready. So who's there to get the business ready? The businesses. So it has to, again, going back, it has to be business led, and you have to make sure that you have the right commitment in place for the time and the energy of those people from the business that are going to be in that project.
Right. Yeah, because you could do a bang up job on the S/4HANA technical deployment and build the software exactly the way the organization wants it built, but you could still end up with shelfware that doesn't end up getting used, or ends up getting
exactly the way that the solution is designed to be built, but doesn't necessarily allow the customer to continue the things that differentiate them, because it's boxed them into something that it's just not going to work for their business. So it's really important to be very clear as you're going into these projects. what is it that makes you unique? What is your quote unquote value proposition to your customers that we can't change, that's not negotiable, so that it's very clear to those people implementing the solution that they've got to honor that. And if it means customizing a part of the application or doing some kind of thing outside of the application to be able to provide that capability to your organization, then that needs to be planned for.
Yeah. Yeah. And you used the term business readiness a moment ago, which is a great word. But it leads me to another question, which is when you're, what are the ways to get ready, prior to starting an implementation or prior to bringing in your system integrator? What are some of the things that organizations should be thinking about doing as a way to accelerate the project later on, but not necessarily having to wait until the SI gets their army of consultants on board?
Yep. So it always comes down to people and process, but there's also some other caveats that might fall into the technology area. So when I think of the people and process things you can do in advance, it's really starting to maybe build some of those communities of practice within the organization. So if you know you're not going to do this SAP project for a year from now, even though I know that 2027 clock is ticking fast, right. But let's say you've got a little bit of time before you're going to start. One thing you can start to do is identify, who is going to be on the project full time, but then who are the other people in the organization that are going to be part of that community. So let's say you've got a buyer that you've identified that's going to be on the project. Find, the buyers from these 7 other divisions that are going to be part of that community, and have them actually start talking to each other and figuring out how they do their work. Figure out where they're different, so that when they do get to the point when they're in a workshop and the SI is coming in and showing them how the SAP works, then that person in the back of their mind is not only thinking about how they do it in their job, but how the other 7 people in their community do it. So that's one thing that you could start to do, is build those communities of practice. And it also starts to build, a lot of these companies are doing this because they want to be one company. This allows you to start moving down that path of that cultural path. Another thing you can do too is build kind of another community, but like a master data ownership governance group. So a lot of companies, sadly, IT doesn't necessarily own the data, but they manage the data.
Right.
So in turn, it makes everybody feel like they own, IT owns the data. They're always the ones that are even creating the data for them. So change that organization structure. Move the data maintenance, the data governance to the business. Identify your customer data stewards. Identify your material master stewards. And again, build those communities and start to identify, where can we clean up our data? Where can we standardize our data? Where can we combine our data? All those things because when we go live, I always tell clients, like, of the tickets that come in that are related to the system, that 80% of those tickets are data related. It's not because the system doesn't work. It's almost all 80% data related. And then of the 100% of the tickets that come in, 50%, the top 50, are user readiness related. Like, people just don't know how to do something. They weren't trained well enough. And then the other 50% are system related, but of the system related ones, 80% are master data. So master data is by far the biggest thing you can do in preparation for your SAP implementations. So those are the 2 things I think are really important to do if you've got some time before you're starting your project. And if you don't, do it as soon as the project starts.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And I think one way to think about it too is, even if you don't have the time to do it, let's just say, well, we've got to get this going right now. We don't have time to do everything you just described. Well, I would argue you should do it anyway. You should start it and maybe even hold off on some other stuff and do that foundational piece first, because you're just going to speed up the project and make sure you get better use of your resources when you get full blown into the implementation. Whereas if you sort of skip over it or try to do it in parallel as the rest of the project is starting, you're probably going to get sucked into the real techie stuff that isn't as important as the stuff you just described. So, I might challenge it a bit and say, even if you don't have time, still find the time to do it. You may feel like you're delaying the project, and I use that in quotes, delaying the project, but you're not really. You're just getting the foundation in place so that you can, design, build, test a lot faster later on.
And I have one more thing to add. So this is going to feel like a very old school approach, but I reflect back on projects that I did back when I had just left IBM and was with one of the big 4, And back then, the approach to SAP implementations was prepare, blueprint, it was whatever the build was, realize, prep or test, and then go live. Those were like the ASAP methodology for phases. But part of that blueprint, the first step of it was document your as-is process. Now, I'm not saying like document it to the point of, it's pixel perfect for training, or you've covered every variable, but document the as-is enough so that those, and this is things that those communities can be doing, you're identifying where your differentiators are, and it allows you to visualize where your current state is different from future state.
Right.
But it allows you to have a tool to really quickly bring your SI up to speed of how you do things. Because in the new Activate methodology, they skip that completely. They just come in and they're like, here's SAP. How does it not work? The problem with that is that's not how our minds work as human beings.
Right.
Our minds work of they're sitting there trying to process not only this new way of doing things, but translate it, almost like translating from one language to another, how I do it today. So they're not grasping everything by doing it in that way. So if you give the business an opportunity to explain how you do it today, the consultant's going to be able to absorb it because they already know how SAP works. Yeah. They're going to be able to make the translation themselves and decide, can we meet those requirements of how they do it today with the way that SAP works? But then now they also have the capability of describing how SAP's future state is different than how they do it today, which is so difficult on these projects where they just go straight to SAP. So right. That's another little nugget of my wisdom of 30 years doing this, that just take the time to go back and just start with some of those core key differentiating as-is processes. Don't worry about your AP. Don't worry about your, the things that aren't your differentiator, right. Unless you're a payment processor as a company.
Right. Then yes, of course it matters then. But
yes.
For most organizations, AP is not a source of competitive advantage to pay vendors faster. All right, good stuff. Well, hold that thought, Jocelyn. I've got a lot more questions for you. But first, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back with more of the Journey to S/4HANA podcast. If you're using SAP, Oracle, or Microsoft Dynamics, or any other sort of legacy system, you might be feeling pressure to migrate to a more modern version of those legacy systems. However, there's another option out there. You can look at third-party support as a way to extend your life cycle and save money on your legacy systems while you figure out your own IT roadmap that fits your schedule. So there's a company out there called Spinnaker Support that supports, among others, SAP, Oracle, and Microsoft customers. And in general, Spinnaker customers are going to save 60% on their annual support maintenance. They're going to get extended lifecycle support. So these are support levels that help organizations take control of their IT roadmap and give them an option that extends beyond the sunset period for what SAP, Microsoft, Oracle, and other software vendors are offering. So that's one of the things that's the beauty, is not only you're saving money, but it also gives you an opportunity to work past and have a roadmap that works past the timeline that the software vendors have given. In addition, you're going to deal with or leverage expertise from consultants and support professionals that have over 20 years of experience on average. You're going to get world-class security. You're going to get proactive support. So it's actually not just fixing stuff that breaks, but also ensuring that you get more value out of your system. And Spinnaker also provides global availability. So it's really important you check out this as an option. There's third-party support providers like Spinnaker that can give you an option that takes some of that pressure off to have to feel like you have to upgrade your system right now. So to check out this concept and to learn more, I encourage you to read a white paper that we've provided for you to the listeners of this show. It's called The Skeptic's Guide to Third-Party Maintenance and Support. So there's a link in the description field of this podcast, so be sure to check that out. You can download that. You can learn more about what third-party support is, learn more about the advantages and what some of the common frequently asked questions are, and really just address any questions you might have. So be sure to check it out. It's from Spinnaker Support. You can download that paper for free, and hope you enjoy the rest of this episode. Hello, welcome back to episode number 13 of the Journey to S/4HANA podcast. My name is Eric Kimberling here with Darren Fiakuski. You can find new episodes of this show every week by going to journeytos4hana.com. The show is sponsored by Third Stage Consulting and produced by Major Tom Productions. So thank you for being here today. We're here having a conversation with Jocelyn Hayes, and we're talking about some of her experiences with her S4HANA implementations and some of her client work over the years. You know what else is great? A secondary benefit to what you just described, Jocelyn, is the buy-in that you get from employees just by listening and asking the question of how do you do things today. Doesn't I don't want to suggest you don't even have to listen, but let me just humor me for a second. Even if you don't hear what they say, just the fact that you asked and they get a chance to explain how things work today. Now, when you come to them with a solution that looks potentially a lot different than the way things work today, at least they feel like, okay, well, you at least tried to understand what it is we do. And there's
you make them part of the journey. It's always what it comes down to. Yeah.
Versus the cookie cutter response, which a lot of SIs have, which is we've got best practices, we've got pre-configurations, we'll come in and show you, and we'll do a little, you basically tell us why this won't work, which to your point, it's too much to absorb. And usually it's moving too fast. They need to know right away, is this going to work or not? Because we've got to go start building it. And, you don't have time to sit around and think about it. Let's go talk to some people. They need an answer right away. So that dynamic oftentimes backfires.
And again, this is also goes back to why it needs to be business driven. And those people from the business that are driving this need to understand these nuances. And they often need a trusted advisor like us to be poking them on the shoulder, like we should do this first. And it's your job, business leader, to go tell the SI that we're going to do it this way because this is what's going to work for us. And not allow them just to say, well, but this is our methodology. We just come in and tell you how it is and you tell us the gaps. And, just be your own best advocate of making sure that your project is successful.
Yeah, that's another piece of great advice is, manage your SI and just remember it's your organization. A lot of times, I think a lot of organizations get really intimidated by these big consulting firms. You and I both worked at ones in question here where you've got, these big companies with hundreds of thousands of employees. And even if you're a good sized company that has 10 or 20,000 employees, you're still tiny compared to these big consultancies with hundreds of thousands of employees. And sometimes because they're the experts, because there's so much scale in these organizations, I feel like organizations are almost afraid to stand up to them, because they've got the brand name, the size, the expertise. So surely I can't tell them how this SAP project is going to work. But what I would agree with you absolutely do. Just like if you have a house built, you're not just going to sit back and let the contractor and the general contractor and all the subcontractors just do whatever they want because that's what they consider best practice. You're going to say, no, this is how I want the house built and this is what I want. And that's exactly how you have to treat these projects too with your organization.
Right.
What about just real quickly on the grow and rise side of things? You mentioned grow and rise earlier. And we've talked about this in other episodes of this podcast as well, as far as what exactly grow and rise are. But are you seeing what are you seeing amongst customers that you work with and your peers in the SAP space? What are you seeing as it relates to grow and rise as far as effectiveness or helpfulness?
Right. So, there's a lot of companies out there that really want I don't know what the right word is, but ability to license SAP in the way that they're, I guess, most comfortable. So grow and rise really are either a public or a private cloud, from my understanding, hosted and supported by SAP. So it eliminates your option to have either an on-premise or another version of a private cloud that's hosted maybe by a vendor of your choice. So that's my understanding. And so SAP really, they're not going to market to sell it in the non-SAP supported and hosted format, which is making many customers very unhappy. They want the other option. Well, while the other option is still there, it is my understanding that the way that they are pushing this is they're not basically paying the commissions to the account executives if they sell an on-premise license. So, it's not something that is going to be offered to you. You have to push. You'll probably have to hire an outside advisory firm that focuses on software licensing, like Eric's firm, to help you through that process to make sure that you're accurate, advocating for yourself that you need, for whatever reason you want to have that hosted by someone else. Maybe you have a very trusted third-party vendor that you've been working with for 20 years and you want to keep it there. And yeah, so that's what I know about Grow and Rise. And I also, as I've mentioned before, as far as Grow or Rise, I'm not sure about Grow. They offer a lot of starter packs of different solutions. I would caution customers to try to use too much of what's in the starter pack because it just increases the complexity. So really just make sure that whatever you're using in the starter pack is something that is going to meet a need that you have as a business requirement. So one of the examples, I think like the logistics business network. So, that's one of the things in the starter pack. Really just do your due diligence on each of those components to make sure that it's something that's worthwhile adding to the scope of the complexity of your scope.
Yeah. Makes total sense. It's good advice. What about just to sort of bring this all together, everything you're seeing in the market and try to tie together your 30 years of experience in the SAP space, Jocelyn, what closing advice would you give to organizations and project teams that are either about to start their S/4HANA journey or they're early on or in the midst of it right now?
So, I would just go back to some of the things I highlighted when we were talking about why projects aren't as successful as they could be. Make sure that you have a business-led project. If you don't feel like your business has the not necessarily capability, well, maybe capability is the right word. If they need an outside advisor, we don't have to come on full time. We can just be your guide on the side, literally, like call us once a week and tell us what's happening. And we can tell you because Eric and I are fortune tellers. We can tell you exactly what we can predict what's going to happen. And once we hear what's going on and give you some quick advice. So, make sure you have a trusted advisor to help you manage both how do you get your business ready, as well as how do you manage your system integrator so that it doesn't just end up being run by your SI.
Right.
And you get the value out of it, and you're identifying, the things that need to change so that you can get the value.
Yeah. Having someone in your corner that can manage the entire program, not just the technical pieces,
Right.
but the business readiness and the non-technical pieces, as well as managing your SI. Believe it or not, the SIs do need to be managed. Just like any contractor. Yeah. And that's something we can both help with. Well, that's super helpful advice. Really appreciate you being here today, Jocelyn. Sure. And how can people learn more about you, connect with you, or learn more about your company? What are the best ways to do that?
So you can find me on LinkedIn, Jocelyn Hayes. You can also find my website at alliancepointadvisors.com and learn more about some of the work that we do around organizational readiness, operational readiness, leadership readiness, and business readiness, or user readiness. And we call all that business readiness.
Perfect. Good deal. Well, be sure to connect with Jocelyn. She's been in the space a long time, knows her stuff, and I appreciate you sharing it with our audience here today.
All right. Thanks for having me.
All right. That was great stuff. Good lessons there and a lot to unpack and debrief. In fact, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll dive into some of these topics and elaborate on some of these topics that we just talked about with Jocelyn. But first, we're going to take a quick break. You're listening to the Journey to S/4HANA podcast. I recently published my first book. It's called The Final Countdown, Strategies to Reach the Third Stage of Digital Transformation. And I wrote this book because I really wanted to find a concise way to share some of my knowledge around digital strategy and how to get started on a digital transformation journey. So in this book, I cover 3 different sections. I cover the people, process, and technology aspects of transformation with the idea that it's meant to be a starting point, a launching pad for organizations and team members that are going through digital transformations. So I encourage you to buy this book. You can get it electronically, you can get it paperback, or you can get it in hard copy as I'm holding here in front of you. You can get it by going to thefinalcountdown.com. You can also search for it on Amazon if you shop at Amazon. Otherwise, just go to thefinalcountdown.com. Love to hear your feedback on this book as well. So I hope you check it out and hope you enjoy.
If you are involved in any sort of digital transformation or business change initiative, you will want to download the Digital Transformation Report. With its comprehensive overview of business and technology trends and best practices, this report is a must-have guide for any transformation project or executive team. Download this free report by visiting Third Stage Consulting at thirdstage-consulting.com. You can also visit our website to learn more about us or download independent reports, videos, and other best practices. Again, visit thirdstage-consulting.com today to learn how you can take your transformation to the third stage of success.
Hello, and welcome back to episode number 13 of the Journey to S4HANA podcast. My name is Eric Kimberling here at Darian Fiakuski, and you can find new episodes of this show every week by going to journeyto s4hana.com. And Darian, we just had Jocelyn on the show. We chatted about some of her experience with different clients and different S4HANA implementations over the years. What were some of your thoughts and takeaways from that conversation?
Yeah, I thought Jocelyn provided some really great actionable takeaways that a lot of listeners could implement or use during their journey with SAP. One thing that she discussed that stood out to me was building communities of practice within organizations to prepare for SAP projects. How can these communities improve collaboration and readiness among business users prior to implementation?
Well, if anything, I think the biggest thing it does is it creates a sense of ownership, a sense of ownership of the project. So you're focused on building your own competencies in learning and taking control of and ownership of the project and the technology versus just simply outsourcing it to someone else who's an expert. Now, you can still leverage those experts, of course. You want experts that have done it before and that can guide you through it, but you don't want the playing field to be so off balance. And the way to balance the playing field and to sort of have an even an equal seat at the table or a level playing field for the entire team is to learn as much as you can. Now, you're not going to become an expert overnight in S4HANA, but if you collaborate, you learn together with other team members, it just gives you a sense of ownership and confidence to where you can start managing the system integrator, or you can start to manage SAP without them telling you how you're going to run your business. And it just gives you, more ownership. It allows you to implement more effectively. Typically, usually you're going to implement cheaper and faster if you have more ownership and more say and more control of the project. Whereas if you don't, you're not going to know when and where to ask the questions and when and where to challenge your third-party technology providers. So those are a few things that come to mind.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that's something that you highlighted in the conversation too, is organizations need to manage their system integrators effectively in order to maintain that control. Jocelyn also emphasized the value of having a trusted advisor during SAP projects, kind of something else that you mentioned and how valuable that can be. Could you maybe dive into more of how organizations can benefit from external advisory support in order to enhance their readiness to manage their project effectively?
Yeah. And I think having an independent tech provider that's not there to sell you software and they're not there to necessarily expand the S4HANA footprint unnecessarily or in a way that's going to cost you more than it delivers value. You need someone on your side that's really there to represent you. And that's a role that we at Third Stage play. I know Jocelyn and her company plays a similar role where, they're not selling S4HANA software. They're not commissioned on it. They're not getting compensated by SAP, and neither are we. And, the reason clients hire us and the reason they like us for their S4HANA projects is because we act as an extension of their team. We've got the same expertise and the knowledge of how to implement S4HANA, but we're not SAP. We're not an SAP system integrator. We're not Deloitte. We're not Accenture. We're not there to put 100 people on a project in to make millions of dollars on a project. We're there to represent our client's best interests, and the only person that pays us is our client. So, that's really important because the other thing we believe in too is we want to build competencies and confidence with our clients. We want them to be in charge and in control. We'd rather lead them from behind and help them build their competencies and become more self-sufficient rather than creating this sort of learned helplessness where a client can't get rid of us because we own all the knowledge and we didn't teach them anything. So our job is really to kind of work ourselves out of a job over time to where we advise them, we don't overstay our welcome, and we help the client manage the project. And then, generally that's going to be a lot more cost effective for clients than if they just completely outsource to an SAP partner and have no visibility into what they're doing.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think there's definitely a lot of things that listeners or the audience today can take away from this conversation and really implement into whatever they are doing or working on.
Yeah, absolutely. Hopefully it has helped provided that background, and hopefully it's given you some good tips as you get started on your S4HANA implementation. And we got a couple episodes left this season. Episodes number 14 and 15 are coming up here in the next couple weeks. Next week on episode 14, we'll have Mike Stone, who's an SAP customer. He's going to be on talking about his lessons learned from his recent S4HANA implementation. And then for the season finale, episode number 15, which will be out on June 23rd, we'll have Timo Elliott on, who's going to join us from Paris, France. And he is the head of innovation at SAP and global innovation. So he's going to talk about kind of where SAP is headed with their innovation investments and AI and all that good stuff. So we've got a couple great episodes left for you here today. If you missed any of the past episodes leading up to today, you can always go to the website journeyto s4hana.com. You can listen to or watch all the past episodes there as well. So thank you for joining here today. Thank you, Darian, and thank you, Jocelyn, for being here today. We look forward to seeing you next week. Have a great week in the meantime, and we'll see you next time on the Journey to S4HANA podcast. Take care.